So I want to welcome everyone to Developing a Moral Compass for Clean Energy, a conversation at the intersection of equity and clean energy, hosted by the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Impact, also known as AmFam. This event is hosted by AmFam and Powerhouse. I'm Emily Kirsch, founder and CEO of Powerhouse and founder and managing partner of Powerhouse Ventures. At Powerhouse and Powerhouse Ventures, we back entrepreneurs that are building the future of energy and want to start with you, Colette. Colette, you are a generational native of Bayou Liberty of Louisiana and have spent over 15 years working in the intersection of race, systems, power, and ecology. You're the founder and executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, where you develop programming focused on equitable disaster recovery, global migration, community economic development, climate justice, and energy democracy. On top of that, as if that wasn't enough, you also lead the center's advocacy initiatives, including the legal services in immigration and disaster law. In 2019, you were named an Obama Fellow for your work with Black and Native communities on the front lines of climate change, and were also awarded with an honorary doctorate from Kenyon College. Colette, I'm so happy to see you. Welcome.
So great to see you, Emily. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Also excited to introduce Vien Truong. Vien, you are a climate policy expert and strategist on building an equitable green economy. You direct the climate justice efforts for Steyer, who ran for president, to support the climate efforts on the California Task Force on Business and Jobs Recovery. Your firm, Trung and Associates, advises lawmakers, universities, organizations globally on developing an inclusive workforce, creating sustainable economics and equitable environmental policies. You previously served as the president and CEO of the Dream Corps, where you led Green for All, a national program founded by our mutual friend Van Jones that aims to build a green economy while simultaneously lifting people out of poverty. You also received numerous congressional, state, regional, and local awards for your work advocating on behalf of those most vulnerable to climate change, including getting a White House Champion of Change award. Vien, yay, hello.
Hey, hi everybody.
Hello. On a personal note, Colette, Vien, and I were part of a 2-year fellowship starting in 2014. And in 2015, Colette hosted us in Louisiana, where she so graciously invited us to understand the circumstances and the leadership of the people who she works with. And Colette, I will never forget that you woke us up at 5 in the morning to go crab boat fishing to give us the full bayou experience. So I will never forget that. I deeply appreciate it. And it means a lot to me to have you both here for this little mini reunion.
Hey. So great. So great.
So good to be here. Colette, would love to start with you. You grew up in South Louisiana, where sea level rise and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill have been threatening the lives of people in your communities. How does where you come from inform and influence the work that you do now?
Mm-hmm. Thank you again, Emily and John, for having me here. It's just so great. What, venture capitalists talking about equity? Is that what's happening right now? Yes, I'm here for it. Yes. You know, most folks, and I see a couple of friends on the phone who know me, know that I'm a Bayou girl. I'm from just outside New Orleans. And, you know, I grew up in a community that, as I'm understanding this work more and more, I would call it a tribe, really. Everybody in my entire neighborhood was related to me. And if not related, married to someone who was related. And if not that, we're at least third or fourth cousins. And so there's 137 families who've been living in one place since before this was America. And that's where I grew up. This was a place that was very safe. You were not environmentalists, but everybody took care of the environment, right? That wasn't a label. That was just a part of your everyday experience and your life. What went into the water, how you treated the animals, what happened with the trees mattered, because it was part of not just our desires or our needs. It was part of our culture. It's part of our tradition. To celebrate means to go outside and boil those crabs, right? You got to get on the boat, go get them, boil them, and then it's a very happy day. Louisiana is losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet to sea level rise. And it's being exacerbated by oil and gas drilling. Many of us in South Louisiana are from oil and gas families. It's just the reality of the thing. And so it's been an interesting tension to hold what I've been taught deep in my blood and my soul to love, to understand that a lot of the advancements in this society, the mainstream society, came from my father's ability to work in oil and gas, right, and give me an education. And now what it means to be a lawyer, to see the state of the world right now and to understand the role of law, lawyers, and community folks. It is my grounding. It is my accountability compass. My community is how I determine how I'm going to move every day. And they don't always do what I think, but it's always a helpful lesson in humility to practice listening to the community, what they want, what they need, and figuring out how to use all of the investment that I've had, all of my privilege, to advance the ground. So it's a deep part of me. I used to try to pretend like I wasn't a country girl, but now I just tell folks, just accept me. I'm just as bayou as they come. But it's been a good asset in the climate fight.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction to who you are. Vien, your family left Vietnam as refugees and moved to Oregon and then to Oakland, California, where you grew up. How has your family background and growing up in Oakland influenced how you approach the work that you do today?
Yeah, so my family are refugees, and I'm the youngest of 11 kids. We came here as part of the boat people migration from the Vietnam War. And once we got here, my parents, who never had a day of education in their lives, the only jobs they could find, not speaking any English, not knowing the language, was working on farms. They were migrant farm workers. They picked strawberries and snow peas for years. And when my brothers and sisters were able to help them after school or before school, they would help too. My parents would strap me on their backs, you know, as they were picking. And eventually they had to move to Oakland to find other Asian people that they can help support their family structure. And in Oakland, California, the only work that my parents could find was actually in sweatshops and what they call garment factories, right? And we lived in a community at the time in West Oakland, was surrounded by freeways and highways, with heavy trucks, buses, cars going by your house all day, which is essentially like refineries on wheels, just spewing particulate matter into your home, into your lungs, into the bloodstreams of our kids. 1 out of 4 kids in our community had asthma. We had a high rate of heart disease and strokes for our elders. We eventually moved out of the West Oakland area to Fruitvale. And in Fruitvale, we had a dry cleaners down the street. They were storing chemicals underneath the ground. One of them these vats started leaking. The Fruitvale is called the Fruitvale because it grows fruits and veggies as a sustenance for the community. What we found, not because of that, but we were worried about the chemicals not only in the ground, but also the lead that was coming off the old housing stock that was going into the soil. And right after Flint became exposed for the high levels of lead poisoning that were in the bloodstreams, we actually, in 2016 December, when we learned that the lead levels in the residents in Fruitvale actually had higher lead than Flint, Michigan. Wow. So for me, it was a wake-up call to say, I need to get my kids and my family to a safer place. So we've since moved out of there. But for me, like that experience, that upbringing is completely tied to how I understand everything that we do, because not everybody has the luxury to even move to a different place, right? We get so used to dysfunctions in life, is what I've learned from my family and from ourselves. We get so used to having the inability to go outdoors as we are now, the inability to really, have opportunities in life. And for me and my family, when we had our country taken away from us, it was almost easy to miss when you had your humanity and your opportunities taken away from you. And so for me, the work that I do now is more than about poverty and pollution. It's really about how do we understand the healing and the work that needs to be done to address our economic injustices, our health injustices, our democratic injustices, our racial injustices, and our climate injustices. And that hopefully in the future, my kids and the zip codes they live does not determine how long they get to live, or the quality of life they live.
Really well said, thank you. Let's get real about the challenges before we talk about solutions. Colette, starting with you, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced while working to implement energy justice?
All right, take a breath. Here I go. Racism is the problem, everybody. I don't know if we're ready to accept that or swallow that, but that's what we're dealing with right now. And it's not just individual racism, which is something that is real, but it's a structural system that maintains these disproportionate realities for folks. And I did not understand that. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of this country, the laws of my state. I'm a proud attorney, but I have to say, when you get a handle on the laws and the regulations and the structures and how unjust they are, it's hard to uphold your oath. It's hard to sit there and say, I'm going to uphold this law that I see creates a difference in people's ability to recover. And this is all coming out of Katrina, right? So watching not just 1 year or 5 years, but this has been 15 years of watching what recovery looks like. Who's going to get hit the hardest because redlining put them in a particular place in the first place? Who's going to be able to recover because if you own a house, you have access to recovery dollars, but if you rent, you don't. And in a place like New Orleans, it's 60% renters. Who's making these laws, and who are the laws for? And I got to ask the FEMA director. There are some gaps in the way we respond to disaster. There are gaps, and the response to me was, these laws of recovery were never meant for the lower class. They were never meant for the low income. They were never meant for the most marginalized. They were meant for the middle class. And when you live in a place like the Deep South, and you recognize what the standard of middle class is based on California, Hawaii, and other incomes, and you realize that hardly nobody in the South fits that middle class demographic, then you have to ask yourself, who are the structures for, and what are we maintaining? And that's been a big problem, right? Every single turn is another rule, law, or structure that maintains exactly what we see every day. And I know it's not because people are mean or bad, but it is because we are trying to silo out issues as opposed to understanding how they naturally intersect. And that intersectional analysis, while it is a new and bold thing for many people, is the way many people of color have to live every day. There's not like a housing issue and a food issue. There's a housing, food, transportation, education issue. The society is broken for so many of us in every way. And so I think the obstacles have been that racism, structural racism, but the second biggest obstacle has been people's inability to really acknowledge and accept that reality, right? So even when you see things, i.e. another verdict today, even when you see these things, somehow there is still a question about, well, what did they do? Well, what did they call on to themselves? Well, what was really, I mean, that's the attitude that has been a problem. Because in the middle of trauma, you're forced to explain yourself, explain why you need help, explain what broke, as opposed to just being acknowledged that perhaps this system wasn't ever good enough for you in the first place. It's been a big challenge, but it's also my driver, to be honest, Emily. I get up every day because I meet people like you and Vien, to be quite honest. Had we not been in that fellowship, I probably would have had a different attitude about folks from California. I'll save my California jokes for another day, but I'm just saying.
We'll talk offline.
We'll talk about that. But it is, I mean, it's helpful to have people different in your life, right? It's helpful to have different kinds of thinking in your life, and you can see the world differently. So it's been a driver, but it has been the challenge for sure.
Vien, what about you? Biggest challenges you faced while working to implement energy justice?
I think Colette's right. I think that fundamentally the climate justice work is premised on the racism that we have in this country, right? As Hopkins has said, if it wasn't for racism, we wouldn't have sacrifice zones. We wouldn't think that people can be sacrificed. And therefore we wouldn't have sacrifice zones, which is begetting so much of this work. I would just complement that by just maybe focusing on some other points. We lack leadership in the political and the private sectors right now. We don't have leaders at the federal level and in many states across the country. We continue to see public policy eroded without clear, bold vision on climate change and climate justice work. We know from the science that we have less than a decade now to really turn things around. And there's no one who's actually really leading the charge that's in office. I'm excited that we're gonna hopefully get new leadership at the Oval Office who actually, cares about climate change, who actually believes in it. We need to make sure that that continues to be the reality and continue to push even further on that. I would just add also that one of the things that I worry about is the silos and the barriers and the scarcity mentality that we have. There are so many, even when we do have leadership, even when we do have people who are values aligned, there's a problem with people not working together, where the left hand is not talking to the right, where the investors are not talking to their entrepreneurs, it's not talking to your nonprofits, which is why I'm so glad we're here having this shared conversation together with all of us. But we also have to start with the mentality of how do we do collaborative power and co-powering? How do we move away from the scarcity mentality to know that your strength and your success is actually good for us, right? I will say that Emily and Colette, I get so much help and encouragement and support just from you personally and privately in your advice and counsel to me, but also publicly. When you guys are killing it, I'm like, yes, thank you. That inspires me to do even more, right? And that's what I think we have to continue to do. So, yeah.
Thank you, Vien. Over the past few months, and Colette, starting with you, over the past few months, there's been a resurgence of public attention towards racial justice following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others in this verdict that you just mentioned. Have you seen a corresponding shift in the discussion on equity in climate and clean energy or not?
Mm-hmm. You know, I was invited to speak to the ACEEE Summer Study, and it was a group of engineers, scientists, mathematicians, statisticians, and it was a big deal because I was going to talk about equity, and everybody's waiting to see who's going to run out of the room, really. And one person might have ran, but I had the rest of them locked in. And good. You know what I noticed was a lot of the entrepreneurs, engineers, and such are not on either side of this thing, right? They're not advancing justice, but they're also not here to, like, you know, hurt people. I think we should pay more attention to how to move the middle. And I don't mean the political middle. I mean the folks who understand that, you know, I have a good life, right? Capitalism, I hear the critiques, but it's working for me. Everybody in my family is safe. You know, there's something that a very comfortable person has to do to align themselves with discomfort, right? With folks who are experiencing, you know, I'll go to the extreme, which is murder. And let's be clear, we must even be honest about that extreme. But there's another piece of this, which is just, you know, unfairness. And how do you move those people to the middle? I got so many people writing me after that saying, I never thought about structural racism like that. I never thought about what I do as advancing systems that harm people. What can we do? And a number of them asked me to either speak to groups or help them develop things within their organization. Sure. You know what an organizer says to a request like that? Sure. Like, we're waiting on y'all. Like, yes, come in. And it's about time. It's about time. Where have you been? And the only reason you are just hearing about this now in the middle of your life is because of your privilege. And I'm not mad about it, but let's be clear. I've had to wait 40 something years for you to come into this realization. And that's a long time. And I don't mind the work, but there's got to be an acknowledgement. And I think there has been some movement, especially around climate justice. I think there's still room to grow around energy democracy. Because what I'm hearing is folks thinking that what we need to do is replace the current system we have with a cleaner system. But it's not just the source of energy that's the problem. It's the economic mechanism, that the philosophical driver that's the problem. When we are creating things to just do everlasting growth and everlasting extraction and everlasting taking, like, that is the problem. It's the imbalance. This is not just about shifting from dirty energy to clean. This is about shifting our political and economic philosophy from individual profit to people and planet. And that is a big shift. We still have room on that. And I fear that the number of market-based solutions that are coming are not being looked at as a transition opportunity, but as, you know, just where we should land in the end. And that would be incorrect. We are not seeing a society that has been broken because of dirty energy. We're seeing a society that has been broken because of imbalance in our economic system. And so that's what I would offer. But it's moving, but we got a little ways to go.
Well said, well said. Vien, how about you? Have you seen a corresponding shift in the discussion in equity and climate in the past few months?
There has been. I mean, first, let's just say there has been talk, which is different, right? That people are actually talking about race and racial justice, and are we doing enough around diversity, equity, and inclusion? They're having these conversations in boardrooms, amongst, you know, investors, CEOs are raising the question with their staff: are we doing enough? And that's credit to the organizers who are doing this work. But my worry is that talk is not actually action, right? Like, if I don't see a corollary amount of effort and action that's resulting from that, that makes me really worried, especially when you look at the facts, right? When you have Blacks that are 1.5 times more exposed to hazardous air pollution, when we have 6 6.7 million Blacks exposed to elevated cancer risk because of where they're living, proximate to oil and gas facilities. When you're looking in California and wildfires impacts across the country, Native Americans are 6 times more vulnerable to wildfire impacts than whites, Black and browns 50% more. When you look at hurricane-prone areas where Colette is, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, the rich tend to leave, the poor tend to be left behind. Poverty rates can climb a full percentage higher in these areas when they're hit by major disasters. So, yes, baby, I'm talking about climate resilience. Would you like to join the conversation? Okay. How about in 10 minutes? Okay. They're gonna have video games in 10 minutes, y'all. We gotta wrap it up.
Deal.
So, I mean, this is about how do we make sure that people really internalize the need for action, right? Because all of these facts, these numbers, they're real lives, their families, their generations of impacts. And if we don't actually translate the conversation into direct action, then no, we're not doing enough.
I really need to spend more time with both of you.
Yes.
Thank you. Closing with solutions. There are, I was about to say dozens, and I guess still technically true, but I mentioned before we started that we were hoping that we might get 50 people to join this conversation. There are currently 86 people participating, so grateful to everyone who is prioritizing this conversation and building these bridges that are overdue to be built. In all of the rooms that we are in this moment and coming together for this conversation, there are many investors on this call, corporate decision makers, some of whom might be hearing this for the first time, or it's still a new conversation. What should we know and what should we do? Colette, starting with you. No pressure, easy question, real simple.
Right, I got it. Listen, I got big ideas. I'm telling you, I got big ideas. I think what we should know is that we have been wrongly educated about almost everything that we perceive in this world, including the fact that resources are infinite and time is infinite, and certain lives are worth more than other lives. These are things that even if we don't articulate them, we live that every day. And we've got to be really aware that that's a system we live in, and that's a system, whether we like it or not, we're all upholding. I think what we do about it is it's time for a commitment to self-transformation. It's time for bold action from companies and organizations. And this game is going to be won or lost on our ability to shift the way we consume. This issue is about the way Americans and industrialized nations consume. And we consume as Americans as much energy as 370 people living in Ethiopia. And so they're going to start talking about population shifts and population management. That's next, in case you're not paying attention to sterilization happening in Georgia ICE prisons. But this conversation is going to go to the next level without any self-assessment of what we as Americans contribute to the problem. We have to consume differently, and we have to face some hard truths, and we have to address the original sins of this country, and we have to be brave.
Thank you. Vien, what about you?
You just said sterilization is happening in Georgia ICE prisons. That's got me rattled. Yeah, I mean, that means we really need to make sure we're changing what the structure of power and governance looks like in this country. Vote. Everybody needs to vote. I don't care. We're not going to be friends if you don't vote this November, if not before. Make sure your employees have time to vote. You know, give them time off, even the day off if need to. Support your employees to be poll workers and to volunteer to make sure that there's fidelity around that. If you need to check your voter registration, check resources, vote.org and vote.com, go there, it's easy. On climate justice, make sure that you're increasing climate justice and racial justice, make sure you're increasing your diversity, equity, and inclusion over the next 18 months, right? Can you commit to at least measuring and tracking a growth of 20%? Can you make sure not only to increase the diversity of people on your staff, but that the people who are making decisions in your organization and on your boards are also reflective of the diversity of this country? Can we make sure that you're supporting supply chains? COVID decimated so many businesses of color, which are especially important in communities of color for employees and for their kind of the synergy effect of where the dollars are spent. So make sure that your supply chain reflects the diversity as well of the places that you live. Make sure you're greening up your operations around the energy use, your waste, your recycling. Make sure you're greening up the products and the energy you're using, the VMTs, vehicles, miles traveled that you're using. Make sure you're reducing that. For your investors, invest in people of color, invest in women, invest in people who can actually make sure that we're having the supplies and the products that we need in this country. We live in a world now where everything is connected. Everything is connected no matter where you live, no matter what you do. We're all connected. We're an ecosystem. So let's make sure that you feel that responsibility to not just do the work that nonprofits need to do, but you have responsibility too, to be healthy and supportive of citizenship and democracy in this place.
I wish I had a mic because I would drop it. That means I'm taken back to the fellowship that we were a part of back in 2014 and just so grateful for who you both are, the work you're doing in the world, bringing it to this group of people who need to hear it. It means so much to me. I'm just honored to know you both and extremely grateful for your willingness to take the time and be with us today. So thank you both.